Welcome. In this brief video, I'm going to talk about Dillon and Friends' unifying model of sexual identity development. And this is really coming out of the psychology field. And actually, this is Frank Dillon's profile. He is within the counseling psych staff at the University of Albany. And some of the other publications that he's worked on, but just so you can kind of see the person behind this. And then let's just flip over to the actual article so I can pull up the model that I wanted to show. It's important to note that this is actually not built off of research that they themselves did. This is a model that's built on existing literature, both theoretical and research driven, but it's not developed by a specific student population or a specific population at all. And this model works for both students in higher education, but also fits across the lifespan. It is really more of a lifespan-based model, I think. And it has subsequently had research done on it, but it was not derived from any empirical study, any single empirical study. So one of the really nice implications for practitioners about this, or there are actually a couple of nice implications for practitioners about this model, but one is that it allows for a separation of the internal and the external development processes, and that's what we're seeing in this first figure. So the sexual identity development, our center circle here, is actually a product of your individual and your social. And these can operate in parallel. So they may be at the same space and they may be in different spaces. And I think actually for a lot of people you're probably in two different spaces. And then there's this biopsychosocial process that is really not discussed either in our book or in the original chapter that I have here. When we look at the individual component of this is where you get your dimensions of human sexuality, your needs, your behaviors, your values. When we look at the social identity component of this is really the group membership and the attitudes towards sexual identity groups. Another kind of nice thing, implication for student affairs practitioners when looking at this is that it is looking at a broader question about human sexuality without being constrained or limited to this gay-straight dichotomy of sexual orientation. And so when we're kind of thinking about a lot of the sexual development models out there, sexual identity development models out there, this model is designed to complement, not replace group-specific models. The group-specific models still offer something very valuable. A universal model has complementary strengths and some limitations. We scroll down a little bit. So the meat of this model is going to be these 5 essential processes. And these are going to operate both within the individual component and the social component. The first status, and there is parts in this model I should point out, should be thought of as nonlinear and flexible and fluid. However, there is some linearity implied within the model. The first essentially status is compulsory heterosexuality, and that's where heterosexuality is presumed to be normal, good, universal. This really aligns with Marcia's concept of foreclosure. Most people are likely to experience very little conscious thought about their adoption of this status, so this is where they may not actually know that they're heterosexual, or they may know that they are heterosexual but not really question or think of this in any capacity. I think a nice connection actually to our book, one of our books that we're reading for class, The Make Your Home Among Strangers, is that Lisette is, if we were going to put her within one of these statuses, she might actually fall within the compulsory heterosexuality status because she's working through a lot of social class and first generation and race and all of those other identity issues in the Make Your Home Among Strangers book, but she's not really questioning or working through or thinking about even the sexuality component of it. So this is one space. If we were going to just, we'll walk through these and then we'll apply them to an example, a fictitious example of a student. The next kind of two options, and there's actually three options, but we're going to go with the move up to the active exploration phase. Active exploration is that purposeful exploration, evaluation, experimentation. Can either be cognitive, so just thinking about things, or behavioral, or both. And this, usually your exploration happening in the phase is goal-directed. For heterosexual individuals in particular, this can be associated with questioning, abandoning the social mandates of heterosexuality and the concept that heterosexuality is perceived as normal. So that awareness of how embedded normalcy heteronormativity is. If we move down to the diffusion stage, status, not stage. This is really where we see, and there's two different types of diffusion that's posited here: diffused diffusion and carefree diffusion. This carefree diffusion is essentially where, excuse me, people are expected to indicate low levels of commitment to that exploration. This could be kind of perceived as apathy, so that sense of I don't care. The diffused diffusion really reflects an underlying uncertainty or an insecurity. And this is kind of where you see the psych and the counseling psych perspective come in, because this is where they talk about an intervention potentially being necessary or possible for the person. Both types of diffusion lack a goal-directed intentionality, and this is definitely a status that it needs more research and may not be reflected in some of the previous theoretical perspectives that they built off of. The deepening and commitment phase, so you could go straight from compulsory heterosexuality to deepening and commitment, or a person could. Generally, the model is positing that people would go to active exploration, deepening commitment, and then synthesis as, if we look a little bit, I don't think it's in the textbook, but if you look at the original chapter, the authors kind of towards the end question whether or not someone can get to full synthesis if they have not gone through the active exploration and the deepening process. But a compulsory heterosexuality moving into deepening and commitment would result in someone who's basically more committed to the compulsory heterosexuality component of it. And that person might move to diffusion or active exploration. That's why this is not a linear model. Within the deepening and commitment, there's usually a movement towards greater commitment to identified sexual needs, values, sexual orientation, preference for activities, partner characteristics. This is really similar to Marcia's achieved identity status. And the authors posit more common in the identity development process for LGBT individuals, and perhaps less common in the process for heterosexual individuals. Synthesis is the final status, and that's really the congruent overall self-concept. And synthesis is important to note that this is not permanent. The authors posit that this is potentially the most mature and adaptive status, and it's where your individual sexual identity, your group membership identity, and your attitudes towards the dominant and the marginalized groups merge into an overall self-concept, which is a conscious one and a congruent one. But again, this is posited to be fluid and may change over the course of a lifespan. When we're looking at this, it's important to note that individuals move directly from that compulsory heterosexuality into the deepening and commitment without any type of exploration, and then proceed to synthesis, so they don't have the active exploration phase, may not actually fully demonstrate all the qualities of synthesis, because they have essentially bypassed the questioning of societal values relating to heterosexual privilege. So what does this look like if we are, for example, perhaps using a case study? And so since I can hear my spouse downstairs, I'll pick on him, and offer the case study of a individual who was raised in a very Catholic tradition with parents who are heterosexual and married and active members of the Catholic Church. And the individual attended a Catholic undergraduate institution, but smaller than Marquette, and predominantly also very normalized institution in a variety of capacities. So looking across race and ability and gender and a whole host of other spaces, this was a dominant type institution. The student body was. And so the concept of compulsory heterosexuality is the place in which Kevin existed for, I would say, probably most of high school and probably the first 2 years of college. And then through interactions with other individuals and through reading and curriculum, entered the phase of active exploration, and never really saw themselves as being anything other than heterosexual, but became very aware of the dominant and marginalized groups in society and the way that heterosexuality is a privileged position. And so entering that active exploration stage, moving to the deepening and commitment component of this, I think probably a little later on in graduate school, in particular after traveling out of the country. So being aware of how other cultures, and living within other cultures, and how other cultures, particularly Europe, view sexual identity, and then also coming back with a greater social justice lens, but also being still very well ingrained and not really experimenting with any type of behavior or thought process. Also not really joining any groups as an ally. So there, in some cases, I think this is kind of where maybe this individual still is. So there's not really a necessary movement towards synthesis, but maybe at this particular life phase, the deepening and commitment is the space in which this individual occupies. Another case study example, let's also name Jason. And Jason left the compulsory heterosexuality circle very early on in life, probably by about age 7 or 8. And entered the active exploration phase, and in particular started exploring what it would mean to be a gay male. And upon entering college for the first time, had a deepening and commitment individually and explorations individually associated with behavior and dating, but really wasn't very interested in a deepening or a commitment related to groups on campus. So, and also at that point, decided that college really wasn't the right step for them and wasn't the right place to be. And so, subsequently, in their 20s, Jason went and did a lot of work with social work related avenues, HIV, hepatitis C, a lot of education in the community, and from that space became deepened and more committed in the community portion of this and the social portion of this. And now we can revisit Jason as an early 30s adult learner, and in probably a space of synthesis in which the individual identity is actively dating and within the gay community, and also the group identity, still not necessarily interested in engaging with LGB groups on campus because of the returning adult learner components, but very congruent self-concept in relation to vocation and interest in working with marginalized groups as part of a career path in a conscious capacity. So those are two examples of how the process of sexual identity development might occur within this model. Thank you.